Hola, hola, buenas noches y bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides a este martes de Marte que tenemos aquí un gran panel de invitados. Vamos a hablar de Time is a Body, que es una exposición curada por Amado Cabrales y Oorjag. Y tenemos como invitados también a Priyank Gothwal y a Juan Claudio Toledo, que ya lo conocen, y a mí, a Marcela, Chao, marcianóloga. Entonces, este martes de Marte va a ser en inglés, porque nuestros invitados que están en la India, que de hecho es la mañana para ellos, gracias por estar con nosotros conectados. Entonces, voy a ceder la palabra a Amado Cabrales para que él lleve esta sesión en inglés. Hasta luego.
Okay, I'll switch to English now. Hi, people from Mars Archive. I'm very happy to be here again, not in the channel, but be part of the Mars Archive universe. I met this beautiful project through a workshop, actually working with calendars and time in Mars. So it's good to be back. And back with Time is a Body. Time is a Body is it's an exhibit that I co-create with Oorjag Garg, which is over there. And the aim of this project it was to talk about the cultural construction and also some sort of like an archaeology of time through different societies and different ways of representing time from the art scope. And we did it. The exhibition ended 2 weeks ago, and we wanted to share more about it through this platform to all the people that wasn't able to see it or discuss or talk about this manner because everyone is linked to time. And as Marcela said, we have like now a time difference right now. Here is in Mexico it's night, and in India is in the morning. So, would you like to say something more about what we did in Time is a Body, Orja?
Yes, the exhibition was held at Eugenia Espacio, and we were also helped by this wonderful person, Mafer, who runs the space. It's an artist-run space, and they're really open to collaborations if anybody wants to put some amazing cutting-edge contemporary art exhibitions there.
Great. And we have several artists, half were from the India and half were from Mexico City and one from Colombia. And we're gonna have like two sides of this session. We're gonna have a presentation of Juan Claudio from his perspective about time and how it has evolved through his instruments and the ways that we need it to history. And then we're gonna have the opportunity to know about Priyank project and work around time, and he's gonna tell us more about it in the second part of this show. So I guess we can start with Juan Claudio. How you feel, Juan Claudio? You feel ready?
Sure, but do you want to go in this order? Me first?
Yeah.
All right, that's gonna give us a bit of time to solve some problems. All right. So I am an astronomer. I'm a physicist, and of course, the scientific look of things is something that I have learned from a very young age, and then through my education. And in fact, the measurement of time and calendars and also clocks are one of my passions. So I love that, and astronomy is very tied to time measuring. So that's why Marcela asked me to give a talk about this. And so the point is talking about what I call the human quest to measure time, but through scientific in a scientific context, I mean. And so I'm going to try to give an idea of how science and technology has approached the problem of measuring time and why this has been so important in human culture and civilization. So understanding time is a part of understanding the world, of course, even from very primitive civilizations thousands of years ago. Understanding temporal cycles, so what happens and what gets repeated through time, has been very important. So for instance, temporal cycles dictate the weather, so they dictate when agriculture can happen, what the cycle should be when we try to cultivate the land to produce food, and that has been it has been at the core of civilization rising in Mesopotamia a few thousand years ago. And the measurement of time is so important that historian Daniel Burstein dedicated about one fourth, so one part out of four of his very famous book, The Discoverers, to the human quest of measuring time. So the history of how humans approach this problem and why it was so important throughout the evolution of civilization. So time maybe starts with the natural clocks that we all can see. For instance, the sun is perhaps the most obvious natural clock because the day and night cycle that repeats every 24 hours here on Earth has been at the center of all life on Earth. We can even say that both humans, animals, and plants are configured, have evolved to be dependent on this cycle. So some animals are more active at night, some more active during the day. Some sleep is very related to this, of course. And so all life on Earth depends on this very basic cycle of nature. Another cycle that the sun has is the seasons, of course. And if you think about early agriculture in ancient Mesopotamia or Sumeria, well, they maybe didn't have snow in winter and a hot summer compared to a very cold winter, but they did have wet and dry seasons, which was very important for agriculture, of course, because understanding when or how long each of these seasons lasted was crucial in setting up agricultural land. And so maybe for people like us in the 21st century that who don't really look at the sky with I mean the calm and attention that we should, maybe it's not very obvious that the sun repeats on a yearly basis just because our calendars tell us so, but we don't see it. But these cultures back then did pay much attention to these things, and they realized that the alternation of wet and dry seasons was related to the position of the sun every day. So it wasn't at the same place in the sky every day. And if you track how this changes over many days, you realize that there's a cycle, that the sun, even the length of the day will be different in different moments, and also that the position that the sun reaches and where it rises and sets on the horizon, these things change over the year. And these people realized that that was connected to these wet and dry cycles or these seasons. So it's been a very important part of how we organize life, also this second cycle of the sun, the revolution that the earth makes around the sun and the solar system produces this cycle. And another natural clock that we've been aware of for a very long time is the moon, because the shape of the moon changes over about 25 and a half days. And so people have realized this, and they've paid attention to this continuous change in the sky that repeats itself, to the point that Isaac Asimov, the very famous science fiction writer, in one of his essays, he argues that the changing phases of the moon is perhaps what spurred humans to develop science, because the question is, why does it change this way? So what makes it sometimes be very bright and all illuminated, sometimes look like a crescent, and sometimes being almost completely absent in the sky? So this question maybe is what motivated us to study science and astronomy in the first place. And so counting days and counting seasons, counting years is something that we've done for thousands of years. The Babylonians did it, and since they have the very early forms of writing in clay tablets, they recorded day counts on these tablets. And closer to home, the Mesoamerican cultures here in Mexico and Central America, also had very sophisticated ways to record the passages of days. And the famous Mayan long count calendar can count thousands of years into the future or the past. It can record very long durations because it was important for them to record this in their histories. And so then we started wanting to organize our daily lives around time, because uh, the daily motion of the sun, the rising and a setting of the sun during a day, is a very broad unit of time, and maybe we wanted to be more precise about this. So the sundial, like you see here on the left side, was a very early kind of clock that can record or at least give you an accurate measure of time, because you can then go to someone, I mean, in our imaginations, I guess, and tell them, well, I will meet you when the shadow of this stick or this gnomon is between the third and the fourth mark of the sundial. And so you had now a way to speak about a specific moment in time during the day, using an instrument to measure this. And we have found very old sundials. This one is in Turkey. It was found recently in 2020. It's about 2,000 years old. And so just this carved rock with some inscriptions and some lines and a stick is enough to be able to make this measurement of the time of the day. And of course, after that, when civilization became more sophisticated, and particularly in Europe, well, mechanical clocks started to replace these early ways of measuring time. So around the 14th century in Europe, the first mechanical clock started appearing. And then by the 17th century, after the scientific revolution, or during the scientific revolution, well, the physics started in telling how us to build better and better clocks. So the pendulum got invented by Christian Huygens, and then the balance spring, which is the spring here on the top, which can make clocks much more precise, also got invented. And modern mechanical clocks that we wear on our wrists can use this kind of system still nowadays. And one thing one story of how time was very important in the story of civilization, at least Western civilization, but really all civilizations on Earth, is that if you know the exact time at the current moment, you can use the stars and the sun to determine your exact location on Earth. So time and space and time and navigation have been linked together for a very long time. So if I just observe the position of the sun or the stars and I know the time, I can determine this. And there's a story in the early 18th century where four British warships were returning from sea to Britain. And because they were in the fog and they didn't have very precise clocks on board of the ships, they miscomputed their location and they were wrong, like, I don't know, if 100 kilometers or something like that. And so in the fog, they couldn't see what was ahead, and they crashed into rocks by the British Isle. And there was a massive loss of life. About 2,000 sailors lost their life in this event. And so after that, the British Admiralty was very, of course, embarrassed that how come the Royal Navy had crashed into rocks. And they opened a big prize in Britain for the first inventor that could build a very precise marine clock. So a clock that could be stored in a ship and that could work precisely despite the motions of the sea and the changes of temperature and humidity aboard the ship, which are very big. And so it took a few decades to achieve this. And so finally, John Harrison famously built this H1 clock that could operate in the deck of a ship at sea, and thus solving this problem of longitude. Because, using the stars and the sun, you can easily determine your latitude on Earth, but the longitude is much harder. It depends very precisely on timing. So if you don't know the time at almost a minute, then your longitude will be in error by a lot. And so this solved this problem and made navigation much more precise from then on. Also, another interesting story is after the French Revolution, the French wanted to abandon all religious and old values, right? Because the revolution made a new society in France, according to their idea. And so at the end of the 18th century, after the revolution, they proposed the reformation of the calendar, which is what we now call the French Republican calendar. And they completely changed the structure of the year in different number of months with different number of weeks. And as part of that reformation, they also changed time, or how we measure time. So they proposed to use decimal time, which is splitting one day in 10 hours instead of 24, and splitting each hour in 100 minutes and each minute in 100 seconds. So making everything based on 10, because of course decimalization of the units was also part of the French revolutionary program. No? And this lasted for about 12 years. And after that, and all the chaos that was France after the revolution, this was abandoned and never to be used again. So they went back to the 24-hour clock that we use now everywhere in the world, or almost everywhere. And so finally, we get to modernity, to the 19th and the 20th century. At the end of the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, electricity comes along, and so people invent electric clocks that use electricity to function instead of other power sources. And then in the mid 20th century, electronics come along, so transistors and digital logic. And Seiko invents the Astron, the first electronic watch in history. And then nowadays, the pinnacle of this long quest to measure time is atomic clocks, which are based on our modern knowledge of atomic physics. And these are so precise that they will lose only 1 second of time every 300 million years. So they're extremely precise, much more than anything that came in history before this, and much more than any wristwatch that we use. So the internet, in a way, is synchronized through atomic clocks. So we are living in a world, in an era where very, very precise timekeeping is part of everyday life, even if we don't see it. And then finally, also in the 20th century, physics came to revolutionize our idea of time, because we all have the idea that time is this universal, constantly advancing thing, right? That we experience time, at least the physical time, in the same way. But Einstein's theory of relativity, that was published in the middle of the 20th century, says that no, that the physical time actually passes at different rates for different observers. So depending on an observer's speed and where he or they are in a gravity field, time is different. So for instance, if you're moving very fast, and when we say fast, we mean compared to the speed of light, of course, which is why we never notice these effects here on Earth, because nothing moves this fast on Earth, but we can imagine, and now we have things that do move that fast, maybe microscopic things, but we do. And so when you're moving very fast, your clock ticks slower. And also, if a clock is under stronger gravity, it also ticks slower. So these are predictions of the theory of relativity, and these have been widely confirmed by experiments, both in laboratories, and also the GPS satellites have atomic clocks on board, and we can measure this difference because they're up high in very high orbit, and they're moving very fast. Their clocks don't go at the same rate as ours down here on the surface, and we can measure this difference. So this has been completely established from experiment and already. And finally, we get to the question of how we will measure time beyond Earth. If humans ever live on other planets, on the moon, for instance, what time system will they use? For instance, one that the scientists have proposed is, I mean, there are many, but scientists have proposed to because time in Jupiter and Mars, and I just don't mean time in the sense of cycles, but in the sense of how fast physical time goes in this different place of the solar system is different. Then they have invented this sort of universal clock for solar systems, which is imaginary, of course, but we imagine it at the center of the solar system, taking away in the absence of speed or gravity. And then the idea is that if somebody is in Jupiter, they should then try to use this universal clock to compare their clock against, and use that to make conversions between systems of time in the solar systems. I mean, in the far future from us, I guess. But also, different places in the solar system have different natural cycles. So, for instance, Mars has a day that lasts a bit more than 24 hours. It's 24 hours and 40 minutes almost. And a year on Mars lasts more than 2 Earth years. So, of course, these different natural cycles will imply that time measurement for humans living there in someplace in the future, sometime in the future, will have to adapt to these different cycles to be practical, because you want your clock to be able to tell you when it's night, when it's day. And so if the day is a different length on Mars, you have to change your clock, of course. And this has been done, I mean, at least in terms of imagination, or for instance, for Mars rovers that operate on the surface. And so they have a Martian based clock that tracks hours based on the Martian day instead of Earth hours. And so this is useful for scientists working there, because they can tell at a glance if for the rover it's the morning or the afternoon or the night, because the clock has been changed to that. And also, of course, science fiction has imagined many different social consequences of changing how we measure time. So this is a fun novel by Philip K. Dick that explores one of these ideas about how it's going to be different to measure time in different places of the solar system. And so I just finished, and maybe Marcela can make a few comments about this, that with Mars Archive, we have been making every Martian year, so every about 2 years, a Martian dual calendar, which shows both terrestrial and Martian time or day counts. And it's have been very fun to do this over the years. And Marcela, I can hand it to you for a second.
Yes, we have a very beautiful Martian calendar that you can see here. Well, this was like, I think, the first one. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yes, it was the first one. So this was made like for time in Earth. And this one over here it was made for time in Mars. And we made it while the pandemic was on.
There we go.
So it was a little bit complicated because we got lost in time. And also because we decided to make a division. Well, this was a result of the workshop where Amado met us. That was, we made some codex. And the idea is what will happen if Mexicas went to Mars. And so we took their division of time, and with that division of time, we made a proposal of 19 months, but also 37 days. And it was a little bit chaotic to understand which day we were into. And now we are like just preparing the next Martian calendar. So if you are interested, you can contact us. Thank you. Vas, Amado.
And here's on the webpage. You can see them on our webpage, marsarchive.org.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, I just want to say that it's very hard to keep up with the second calendar, because you not only have the Mars time, you also have the Mexica perception of time, and it was so hard to follow. Like, I always get lost after I start using it, and it was very confusing. I mean, it was fun, but it was very confusing. But that would lead me to a few questions, if you allow me, Juan Claudio.
Sure.
Because I really enjoy your presentation, and we start this with time as a body with this thing in our hands. And one is like of course, the need of precision in order to expand our knowledge of space and everything in technology. But at the same time, and I want to go back to this the French Revolution calendar. That's like you have it 365 days, and you can put everything you want inside that. like you can divide them as you want. So I feel like there's like different ways of constructing time and perceive it in ourselves. One is the one that physics allow us to know and can be expanded through knowledge and technology, and the other one is the one is culturally constructed, and and I guess like where does this, for me the dilemma is like when this the linear comprehension of time as idea of progress is that became like to me like a problem. So
Mm.
I want to use your mind to think about why what do you feel like. For me, like I personally think that the perception of time as a linear thing to progress is something that comes from culture, but I don't know where are the bases to perceive this idea of linear time when we start with this idea of the cycles, when we know that the planet and the moving of the rotation translation give us the perception of continuity. But in spite that, we decide at some point to create a linear perception of time that which creates this idea of linked to economy, this idea of linked to speculation and all that. So I don't know. I guess my question is, where do you see this line as a from your area of knowledge, and
Hmm.
what do you think about that?
Well, I guess it comes in the philosophy of physics because one of the earliest philosophical ideas in modern physics during the scientific revolution in the 1700s is the idea of cause and effect, right? So there's an event that happens, and then there's another event that happens that is caused by the first event, right? So this cause and effect relationship defines in a way our linear sense of time, I think, because if you have a bunch of events in a bag and you understand the relations of cause and effect, which is in part what physics has done, trying to understand these relationships of cause and effect, then your events you can sort them along a line because you can determine which came first and which came later, because if you know that A caused B, then you know that A came before B in the normal or usual interpretation of time in physics. So I think our idea that time is linear maybe comes from from that idea, which is philosophy in the end, but it's very intimately tied to physics. And I should say that in modern physics, and I did the talk about special relativity a bit, that idea is not as clear cut as people think, or maybe they don't know a lot of special relativity. But this idea that time is linear gets very warped in special relativity. So for instance, I'm going to give an example. If you imagine the concept of simultaneity, so two events occur at the same time, right? Einstein's theory predicts, and again we have measured this, that simultaneity depends on the observer. So, for instance, you could imagine that you and I saw, or you saw, two events like the usual thought experiment is imagining two lightning strikes that fell some distance away from you at different places, right? So the lightning strikes at the same time in two different places. So these two events are simultaneous by your point of view. But if I'm moving very fast relative to you, then I will not see that those same events at the same time occurring. And so in modern physics, this idea that time is just linear and universal and is the same thing for everyone starts to get very warped. So it's not entirely like we used to think in terms of linear time. But I think that, just going back to your question, that's the origin, I think, from the scientific point of view of this idea of linear time. But as you probably know, many cultures along history have imagined time maybe as circular, as cyclic. So time ends and starts again at some point. So I think there are many ideas we could discuss about how time has been conceived.
Hmm. Yeah. I feel like we are like in the part of this meme, like like time is circular, and you're like some sort of like a dummy, and then you're like you're like the top, and no, it's linear, and then you go back to a
So yeah,
cycle, and then you're
yeah.
we're like a very wise monk. I think we are part of the peak of the graphic, then which we think somehow it is, and then we're gonna culturally evolve to go back to perceive it as a cycle.
Yeah.
But I think as the French Revolution, or even the Russians also tried to do an experiment with
Yeah.
calendars, and it didn't work. I think it's something that we need to adapt to it, because I feel like this knowledge, this thing you've been mentioned, is not even 100 years old, right?
Hmm.
So to be part of culture, thanks to sci-fi, thanks to a lot of advance on that, I think it's something that has been in pop culture and mass
Hmm.
culture, but I don't think it's now something that is like we can perceive or live in every day. So like I say, I feel like we need to go back to this curve or
Hmm.
somehow to get back
Hmm.
there. Like watch the sky again, I guess.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I guess that in a way it's because the importance of cycles, as I discussed in the presentation, right? So inside our brains, there is a small part which is back here near the base of the brain, the brainstem, and we have an organ that is dedicated to producing cycles in our bodies. So
Mm.
this is what causes the circadian rhythm in our physiological functions, because it's tied to the day-night cycle that we experience on Earth. But my point is that we have evolved to the point we have an organ that produces cycles in our bodies, and it's interesting to think that what kind of impact that can have on our perception or our construction of time as a society.
Wow, I didn't know that. Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm also thinking about, you mentioned the atomic clock, and I was thinking about the wobble of the earth and the axial precession that happens, that sort of changes adds time by milliseconds or changes it by like really small ratio. It is not a
Hmm.
big thing, but the idea that the North Star was not always Polaris, and time, or the Milankovitch cycle, as we talk about deep time and the cyclical patterns, they change over tens and thousands of years, something that we can't even comprehend, because this has only started in the past 100 years when we started looking at time like that, or past the Industrial Revolution. So brings the question forth that how do we sort of, it's not going to change our morning or evening in sudden ways, but it's a it's a frame of time that can be measured differently, or time can be looked at in a different way.
Yeah. Yes, I think that the even modern science has opened up our perception to time's cosmological time, which is an idea hard to grasp for us because our lives are very limited in time. But the lives of stars and the lives of galaxies and even the life of the universe itself that we can sort of try to measure right now using science and astronomy, I think
Mhm.
that also can take us to places that have never been possible in the history of mankind, except perhaps through imagination and fiction, which can also imagine very long periods of time, of even times that are outside of time. And as Amado was saying, science fiction imagines then traveling backwards and to the future in time. So there are many ideas that are starting to, I think, interact in between the scientific understanding of modern time and what we have imagined in the past and currently.
And also, I think it's like cultural, no? Because Aymaras think time differently, no? It's also like the idea of the future is the past, something like that. I'm not like quite sure, but it's so I think that there's a connection also with the idea of your mortality, no? You are not going to go back in
Hmm.
time
Sure.
with your embodiment of time. So there's like a cycle, because if you have children, then they are going to, no, but you are going to die. So maybe It's like this idea of having a line ahead of you, but
Mm.
not really the idea of being eternal in that line. No, you have to die, so there's another life coming back, and then like progressing in time, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very a solid origin maybe of our notion of linear time, because everything on Earth, life on Earth, is born and then dies. And we don't know anything that really doesn't, or maybe very few organisms on Earth have something close to being to immortality. So time is maybe different for them, but for most of us on Earth, mortality is real, and so mortality creates a beginning and an end for things. And so that's the idea that I think Marcela wanted to touch on, the idea that maybe that's what creates the arrow, the line, those two ideas. And one can imagine, it has been done in science fiction, what would the universe and time be or feel like for something that is immortal, or something that lives, I don't know, millions of years versus 100 years, like we maybe do, and how then that's going to be different for them, how experiencing reality is not going to be remotely the same as for us, right? We are defined in a way because we live a certain amount of time. That's important, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to add to what Marcela said, that for me, that perspective of linearity to death is because we think as singulars, individuals.
Sure.
But we think in terms of a species, in terms of one bigger being known. The cycle of life is longer, and the idea of singularity breaks the idea of linearity. So that's again the way we perceive, the way we're constructed, culturally constructed, because we watch nature in a way like this single flower, this single animal is gonna die and decay. But the idea of this flower, that a species of flower, probably exceeds millions of years through time, through eons. So for me, that the idea also is a subjective way of
Hmm.
seeing it. And I want to link this to our next guest, which is Priyank, and we want to think also take a jump to it to the idea of art that's always been thought as something very subjective, as something very like singular, but also that touch these subjects in a very specific way, and grabs a little bit of everything of everywhere. And we saw it in the exhibition, like artist takes a little bit of science, that artist takes a little bit of science fiction, narrative, and all that stuff to build a comment or a way to explain to themselves the idea of time. So I want to leave the word now to Project to tell us a little bit more about what he's been developing now around time with his work, and I also led to Oorjag talks a little bit about Priyan's work before the presentation, and also thank Juan Claudio for this always very clarifying and presentation and share of knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amado.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. So the idea of time, as we were talking about, was invented during the, let's say, the scientific or the Western scientific revolution, which is also defined how everyone in the world looks at time. So time is also very colonial. And the manufacturing of time for, let's say, a country like third world country like India, third world in quotation marks, um, influences how time is a construct that is imposed on bodies. And Priyank's work deals with time in that way, where he questions the validity of colonial time and questions the ideas of the Enlightenment era and how time has been constructed by the colonizer. And Priyank is an artist and a researcher based in Delhi, and he works with a lot of mediums, with lens-based media drawing, lecture performances, and he's currently a PhD candidate at the Amsterdam School for Cultural Analysis at the University of Amsterdam. And he also teaches at OP Jindal Global University and is also a founding member of an artist collective called the First Draft Initiative, that they organize social gatherings and pop-up exhibitions both in India and internationally. And today, Priyank will be talking about the founding of a clock tower in Udaipur, Rajasthan, and a little bit about the architecture of it, but also the structure of the clock tower as a gathering space, as a communal space that sort of emerged. And this is based on research and also conversations with a lot of people and rummaging through archives that Priyank will take us through. So Priyank, over to you. I hope I did a good introduction. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, Oorjag, for this introduction, and also for inviting me for this conversation. It's interesting to hear you, all of you guys, and I find it interesting how the time in itself is very broad and all encompassing idea in itself, that at one moment we can talk about from the context of Mars, and at the other moment I can take it to a very small city which is there in the northwest part of India, in Rajasthan, in Udaipur. So it was interesting also to listen to Juan, and where he talked about how historically the temporal references shifted, and with the social desire of precision, right? And but still, this drive went on constantly because the drift sort of persisted, right? What I'm going to do is I will be reading a text from my research, which is somehow still in work in progress. And this particular text examines, it focuses on a specific case study of the Udaipur clock tower, which is a clock tower built by the people of the city during the colonial times. And I'm going to somehow explore the clock tower from the social and cultural perspective, and highlighting how its construction by the people somehow reflect the ambivalent nature of the colonial modernity, and also we can say some form of how, since it was locally produced and constantly, the idea of the order of the time which was constantly reproduced, it has a certain form of self-reflexive nature to it, right? Somehow to also talk about my research in broader, I explore the relationship between time and British colonialism, if I somehow put it broadly, seeking to understand how our experience of time somehow influenced by colonialism, British colonialism in India, to see, considering how the expansion or the imperial expansion, not necessarily as a spatial phenomenon, but also somehow a temporal project which constructed our understanding of time. So I'm going to read the text which I have written for my chapter, and this will be it, in the sense I'll be reading most of it. And I've also, okay, I think Oorjag has presented the screen. Yeah. Is this the PPT or the PDF, Oorjag?
Yes, it's already sharing.
Yeah, but I think if it would be the PPT, then the video would be working. It's PDF, right?
Yes, I think it's the PDF.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
the
I'll be telling you like when to move on to the next screen.
yes, of course.
Yeah, okay, I'll start the reading. It's almost like a 20 to 25 minutes long. And yeah, I hope I don't bore you guys enough. Okay, so in 1887, which is like the late 19th century, 100 years before I was born, a sectarian conflict broke out in my city, Udaipur region of Mewar state, which was ruled by the Rajputs of Sisodia dynasty. On the day of Eid, a Muslim festival of sacrifice, the Bohras, a mercantile Muslim community, brought a male sacrificial goat to Malda Street, which is a street in Udaipur. This particular street, predominantly inhabited by Baniyas, a mercantile community, is renowned for its involvement in trade, money lending, and banking activities, and they adhere to a strict vegetarian lifestyle. The dietary pattern or the dietary regulation of this community are so stringent that they prohibit harming even insects during farming or food preparation. In this case, it's the presence of the sacrificial goat in the neighborhood was an obvious cause to unrest and arguments between the two communities. This altercation escalated into a widespread violence in the city, with confrontation involving stones, bricks, and batons. In response, the city's minister, Pradhan Pannalal Mehta, promptly called a military to restore order and sought help from the posted British agent in the city. Subsequently, the leaders from both the communities, the Bohras and the Baniyas, were summoned. A British officer conducted an inquiry that resulted in the fine of 5,000 rupees, with a Bohras bearing a larger portion. Afterward, the city minister approached King of Udaipur, Maharana Fateh Singh, stating, Huzur, there is no clock tower in the city, and proposing the construction of a clock tower in front of a police station to promote communal harmony. The king agreed and decided to donate money in addition to the collected fines to pay for the project. A clock was imported from London and the clock tower was constructed in 1887. In his diary, Pradhan expressed his belief that it would generate harmony and peace in the city, serving as a symbol of past conflict to help prevent their recurrences. In other words, the locals viewed the tower as a symbolic form, assigning it a significant role in embedding the incident in the city's cultural landscape and the historical consciousness of its people. The story of the Udaipur clock tower, like this or like many others, raises an important question. What and why did the locals choose a clock tower as a symbol of peace and harmony, and how could it help resolve their internal conflicts? I'm interested in exploring the history, the architectural features, and the impact of clock tower on the daily cultural and personal lives of the city residents. I aim to understand how it has contributed to resolving long-standing internal cultural, religious, and political disputes. In doing that, I will argue that the significance of the clock tower in the city or for the locals extend beyond symbolism. Its social importance for the local community reflects broader colonial efforts to instill modern sensibility of time, reshaping social cohesion and identity through what and I uses the theoretical framework of what Michel Foucault calls subjectivation. In this way, the clock tower points to colonial modernity and its ambivalent and reflexive formation, where it recursively reproduces its own image. It does this not only to expand spatially, but also to organize the colony's sense of time. Now, in order to understand the impact of the clock tower as proposing a new regime of time on the lives of the locals, it is also, I think, essential to recognize what it replaced. Before the clock tower was built, time in Udaipur was mainly organized using an instrument called Jalgari. It's a Hindi word which can be translated as water clock. This instrument was installed in significant locations throughout the city, such as the palace and the temples. Historical records from Udaipur mention two such water clocks, one in the city palace situated at the center of the city, the other at a temple, an important pilgrimage center for Jains and Hindu communities. Uja, you can move to the next slide.
Okay. Okay, I think we are there.
Okay, I can see two slides together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Besides serving as a center of power, the king's palace also served as a primary location for the city's temporal organization. At its main gate, two cenotaphs, Gadyal ki Chhatri and Nakarkhane ki Chhatri, were installed, housing two acoustic instruments, a bell and a drum. These instruments signal time based on the palace's water clock. The water clock consisted, like, if I slightly go into the technical details of the instruments, the water clock consisted of a hold copper pot positioned in the wooden box filled with water. The pot was designed to fill for a duration that can be translated as 24 minutes, a time unit referred to as a gadi. Each gadi was counted 8 times to measure one prayer. In Sanskrit, a prayer denotes a unit of time roughly equivalent to 3 hours. The water clock tracked 4 prayers from sunrise to sunset, totaling 12 hours. In the 17th century, an Indian astronomer, Lala, provided a detailed description of an ancient water clock, which was typically made across the subcontinent. The clock, according to him, should be made from copper and has the shape of a lower half of a pot. It has a diameter of 9 inches and a height of 4.5 inches. The next slide, please. The third slide. Yeah, so in this image, you can see a water clock placed outside the temple gate. Yeah, this one. So the clock should be made out of copper and has the shape of a lower half of a pot. It has a diameter of 9 inches and a height of 4.5 inches, weighing a total of 10 palas, which is a traditional Indian unit of weight. 1 pala is equals to 40 to 50 grams. A small hole is should be created using a gold wire that weighs 3 and 1/3 mashkas, which is a unit equivalent to approximately 3.23 grams. The length of this wire should measure 4 fingers or about 3 inches, which should pass across throughout the hole. While the bell was rung at the end of each prayer in the palace, the drum was struck only during the critical events, such as the king's processions or important ceremonies or announcements. The nearby temples and homes oriented themselves according to the bell's recurring time signals. This system of temporal reckoning was so fundamental to the social life that it ultimately led to the Hindi word gadi, an indirect translation for the clock derived from gada, which means pot. Similarly, in temple A temple built in 1874 CE by the ruler of Mewar in Rishabdev town of Udaipur district facilitated another such routine of time indication. The temple serves as a significant pilgrimage site for various sects of Jains and Hindus, and its rituals are scheduled according to a water clock located at its main gate, with a bell rung for each prayer to facilitate temple rituals. The temporal order established by palace and the temple extended into the daily lives of the city dwellers, shaping their daily tasks and activities and organizing their experience of time. The city was also home to various other time measuring devices, including sundials and sand or salt hourglasses, commonly found in royal or upper classes households. Now, the asymmetrical relationship between the palace's bell and its drum, which was designated to amplify the king's public events to the city and its people, suggests that for most occasions the people did not require such an intricate measure of time. The occasional sound of the king's drum was sufficient for people to organize their routines around the events of the king or the religious place. Given that the sophisticated system of time measurement already in place, it is evident that the clock tower was not the first instrument in the city that used to mark the passage of time in socially agreed upon abstract units. The community had already organized itself around specific time units defined by the water clock. However, this earlier time regime was deeply rooted in and oriented through the ethos and values of the temple and the king. Each communities were structured around its own temporal references without isolating the other in the given landscape or the cultural fabric. This diverse organization of time, we can understand this through a concept of taskscape, which is a concept theorized by a British anthropologist, Tim Ingold, which builds on the historian E.P. Thompson's widely recognized idea of task temporality, which is oriented through tasks. In his chapter, The Temporality of Landscape, Ingold draws connection between landscape and the daily tasks that individuals performed over it. The landscape that emerges from the interlocking and the interconnected tasks performed by the various agents is referred by Ingold as taskscapes. So he's merging the idea of task and the landscape together to create something he called taskscapes. From Ingold's perspective, the pre-clock tower taskscape of Udaipur city consisted of these interconnected tasks organized by the different temporal references of various religious practices, which sometimes synchronized and sometimes collided, also underscoring their differences. Oorjag, you can move to the next slide. Am I audible, right?
Yes.
Okay, because the electricity went off. I thought the Wi-Fi would also be affected. Okay, anyways. Um, in contrast, the clock tower introduced, in contrast to the time of the water clock, the clock tower introduced more incessant, precise, and value neutral method of timekeeping. It visually indicated every second and audibly announced every half hour with a bell, reaching a larger portion of the city. While the day once expanded and contracted in relation to the tasks which were performed within it, it now exists as a uniform, homogeneous duration of clock time. which is a priori, ready before and beyond for one to fill it. It brought all diverse temporal authorities which were working in tandem to a common temporal reference. The introduction of the clock tower marked a significant social transformation, leading to the homogenization and universalization of time. It does it by democratizing the time and its division into abstract units. In other words, whereas the old temporal order was anchored around the king and the religious places, the modern clock tower granted individuals access to impersonal, unmediated, and empty time. This allowed individuals to self regulate and manage their daily tasks by organizing their schedule in discrete, abstract, value neutral temporal units. This shift to the new regime of time redefined the temporal order as an autotelic framework, for time became an end in itself. This transition from dependence on specific events to an abstract concept of time, mediated by clock, marks a shift from sovereign power to a form of governance that prioritizes self discipline. In this context, from the subject of the sacred order, including the king, the inhabitants of the city became what Foucault calls the disciplinary subjects, with bodies that are economically productive but politically homogeneous and obedient. However, the construction of clock tower cannot be entirely understood through a linear Foucauldian framework of shifting power structure, for the transformation in Europe was not replicated in the colony as seamlessly as it is often theorized. We must also consider the construction of the clock tower within the political context that blends the different ruling systems between British colonial state and the Rajput kings. Next slide, please. Before the treaty with the British in 1818, the history of Mewar was marked by a constant struggle against the Muslim rulers who invaded the state from the 13th century onwards and against the Maratha rulers from the 16th century onwards. In contrast, the British played a distinctive role. They acted as a political referees, a role that involved resolving conflicts and managing administrative affairs and the matters of security. The revenue paid to the British by the Ranas of Mewar was more in the form of a tribute than direct tax. This was the departure from the traditional rule by military coercion and conquest. By the mid 19th century, Thomas Metcalfe, who is a scholar specializing in South Asia, argues that Indian kings were carefully ordered and ranked in their positions, functioning as junior partners in the forming of the British Empire. According to Metcalfe, the British were keen on forming alliances with the princely kings because through them they felt they could make a direct link to the country's medieval past and achieve the access they desired to authentic traditional authority instead of an external colonial control. This viewpoint resulted in the Rajputs being placed in a very complex position. Metcalfe argues that while the British sought out the Rajput for their traditional authority, they were not allowed to exercise their power in an entirely traditional manner. He writes, and I quote, "Under the Raj, they, the Rajputs, were expected to be, as they never had been before, rulers who were both traditional and modern, rooted in the past, yet actively participating in the creation of New India." The contact with the British thus fundamentally transformed the rulers of Mewar in terms of their power position and vision to rule in ways that they had never experienced before their interaction with Muslims or Maratha rulers. Now, Udaipur Clock Towers effectively exemplifies this complex relationship between British and Mewar rulers. Its construction following the religious dispute in the town marks its symbolic role as a British political agent. As Metcalfe argues, the tower evoked a sense of authentic history of the country with its local architecture, while simultaneously contributing to the formation of modern empire with the clock installed within it. The introduction of a hybrid architectural structure modeled after victory towers and triumphal columns is surprisingly never threatened the community's pride, which had fought valiantly against other invasion to protect its tradition. Instead, the community embraced this new design, the hybrid design of the clock tower, as part of their heritage. You can move to the next slide. You can leave one slide in between. Yeah, we can see the clock tower here, and its hybrid architectural style, which resembles a cascading stacks of stories integrated into the region's cultural landscape. The design aims to make it appear as a natural protrusion from the ground, extending upward for optimal visibility. Yet every design element is intended to reflect the clock's image back onto the surrounding landscape in all four directions. By emphasizing visibility, height, circulation, and the integration of clock into the local culture and environment, the tower aesthetically mediates the unmediated order of time. Thus, with its locally sourced material, the architectural style, as well as the unique blend of the local motifs and design, featuring Hindu-style extended eaves, trabeated openings, lotus finials, along with hybrid Islamic domes and intricate floral carvings, the clock tower embeds the clock and its temporal abstraction within the pre-existing cultural fabric of the city. In short, it represents a significant shift in the perception of modern temporality that and its discipline from theirs to ours. Next slide, please. Now, to understand this ambivalent operation of power, which we can examine Bentham's utopian model of panopticism, while Foucault expands upon which Foucault expands upon to describe the disciplinary mechanism of the 17th and 18th century Europe. The model of panopticon symbolizes an effective method of surveillance and observation, unifying various disciplinary enclosure, or we can say taskscapes, into a cohesive mechanism for defining power relation in the everyday lives of individuals. It represents an all-seeing eye that grants axial visibility while placing individuals in a state of lateral invisibility, creating a condition of constant awareness that ensures automatic functioning of power. In this context, Foucault asserts that visibility is trap. The clock tower builds on this concept of visibility and expands the operation of power. In his 1998 book, Indian sociologist Sanjay Srivastava explores the significant role of clock tower in shaping modern societies, and he compares the clock tower to Foucault's concept of panopticon. Srivastava argues that like the panopticon acting as an all-seeing eye, the clock tower serves as a focal point that captures attention and visibility. He describes the clock tower as a reverse panopticon in this sense, which, through its visibility, unconsciously organizes people and turns them into temporal subjects. The effect of this reverse panopticon not only creates subjects but also prompts them to become source of discipline for one another. Essentially, clock tower reconfigures the city into the space of mutual visibility, under a temporal and spatial regime of discipline. As a result, concepts like lateness, punctuality, rhythm, synchrony become socially legible, comparable, and thus subject to social organization and discipline. Foucault attributes a polyvalent nature to this mechanism, indicating that it can be applied in various settings. He argues that wherever power encounters multiplicity, the panopticon becomes the most viable form of control. In this sense, uh, the Udaipur clock tower was never merely a symbol of harmony. Its construction was never solely intended to solidify the conflict between the two communities, to prevent their recurrence. Instead, it acts as an apparatus through which modern disciplined subjectivity is locally produced and continuously reproduced. In this way, the clock becomes both the effect of social relations as it emerges because modernity requires certain temporal conditions, as well as its arbiter at the same time, as it does not remain a neutral tool. The clock structures society into abstract, rational, and the measurable units. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Priyank. There's a lot to think here. Does anybody have questions before I start?
Yeah, I have a few notes. Thank you. I guess I want to talk about the contrast because with the previous presentation we like saw like at least like 2,000 years of history of time and instruments and all stuff, and then we moved to the shift of less 200 years for the shift from the from a more like a localized perception of time to a more modern perception of time to colonialism, and then how the use of symbols moved one to another, and also how syncretism was involved through aesthetics to create the idea of continuity of one stage of power to another one. That is we move through the king to the idea of the of like or to a colony. So that only allow me to think about how these changes again the like cultural changes take a lot of time. It's like they move slowly and the people's lives change gradually or very fast in order to how these changes are implemented in a culture in a specific place. So I think that is something that is something horrific and also amazed to see in 20th century at least. For me, also made me think about how you perceive this change from the panoptic, and also thinking of Foucault. Like I think this, like the postmodernity, have made this shift from the panoptic to the biopolitic, and I mean this because we moved to have a tower to everyone look at to see if there's running late, to see what time needs to go and everything, to something that we have in our wrist, that's something we have on our phones all the time. So the panopticon is still there, but reduces size, and reduces size in a way we keep time with us and move from the result. I don't remember how when that happened in history that we start using miniaturized clocks, but I think it's very linked also with the idea of biopolitic and how we need to like embrace in more detail time. So I don't know how you perceive from your research this idea of like the shift. Like we moved for these water clocks, then to this clock towers, and now I feel now we have time in our cell phones and clocks in the wristles. So I feel that like there's a miniaturization of control in these artifacts.
Yeah, means when even when Foucault talks about panopticon, he calls it more as a utopian model. By that, he never meant that you would see a literal panopticon anywhere, but he meant that it is a form of a disciplinary mechanism which is there in every disciplinary enclosure, like it be it a hospital, school, military barracks, and different enclosures. What he wanted to emphasize is that how the power structure shifted uh, from the rule of a sovereign to people, where they start realizing that they've been constantly observed, and hence they self disciplining themselves. So this observation that they're constantly observed, there the mechanism of panopticon lies. And like, for example, I've mentioned here that the tower was just there in a symbolic form, just so that people become a clock tower for each other. They start disciplining each other. They start identifying the ideas of lateness and punctuality and synchrony within themselves, so that the power does not have to coerce or to impose it as it used to do in pre-modern time, but the people become subjects of power by themselves. They become the subject of discipline by themselves. So the shift for me, it was interesting to note down through a clock tower how uh, this shift in power was, I would use the word, smuggled through the indigenous architecture, and how this can literally be perceived that a clock which was literally smuggled uh, uh, through this hybrid architecture of the tower. But the idea is not that there must be a tower, but the tower is merely facilitating the people to become the subject of time themselves. And now it's not necessary whether the tower is visible or not, because they're constantly perceiving that they've been observed or they've been seen, and hence they are the subject of power now. So they would behave themselves, they would self-regulate themselves, they would self-discipline themselves. And if they see some anomaly within the order in itself, they would, just to maintain, restore the order, they would correct that behavior. So this in itself is important, that what Foucault is talking about is not just one tower or one construction, but a structure in itself which shifted in the late 19th century in India. If we talk, if in Europe it was slightly earlier.
Yes, it was earlier. And Amado, to just answer your question quickly, wristwatches became common in Western society in the 20th century. So around the 1930s, 1940s. Before that, the concept of having a clock on your wrist was not common. People used pocket watches before that, which was a different idea of having time on you. But Priyank, I'm very interested in because you know India and Mexico have very a lot of similarities in terms of our colonial pasts. And here in Mexico, Amado mentioned syncretism, how when a Spanish conquest occurred and they tried to change our customs and our mystical and religious organization here in the indigenous peoples of Mexico, they did that through trying to combine their own cultural symbols with ours so that it was easier for the indigenous people to accept. So I see that this clock tower, in a way, is a symbol of that in the case that you're studying, right? But I was interested. So how did people, and I don't mean necessarily the people in power, but the people of the
Yeah.
rest of society and in that city, how did they take the idea of having a clock tower replace the water clocks that were in the palace? Was it something
Yes.
that people accepted in certain way because it represented modernity and they were attracted to that idea, or was there a rejection at first of this change of symbols and ways of keeping time?
Means essentially, I'm asking the same question. This story which I stated in the beginning talks about that. I don't know why, like the minister asked to the king uh, that the conflict which happened in the city would be restored by with the presence of a clock tower in the city. And so I found this statement in the diary of the minister himself. So he had written a diary entry about the clock tower. And this also amazed me in the terms that people were not, and this is what I was trying to argue, in the sense that to become a subject of time is also start desiring that uh, uh, that order of time. And this becomes very visible with the construction of the clock tower. So this is what I call the self-reflexive nature of the power, that it demands its own image. So we can't say whether the desire came first or the apparatus or the tower came first. It's the tower came first who created the desire for the time or the punctuality, or it was the idea of modern sensibility of time which was there, which allowed people to embrace the clock tower. But what we can through the archival records, what we can see is that people did embrace the clock tower. So in that sense, we can, this is what I'm calling the ambivalent nature of colonial modernity, that it does not imposes itself, its operation of its operation is not by imposing its rules and regulation over people, but, and that's why I use Foucault's subjectivation, that it makes people subject, and that's why people start desiring their own control, their own regulation. They needed an order, a precise order, which was not giving much to them, because this is what I'm researching here, that if it would have been a desire for an abstract intricate order of time, they already had an abstract intricate order of time with the water clock. And they seemed like working well, even when it was organized or controlled by a king. What clock tower did is to give them this value neutral intricate measurement of time impersonally to them, unmediated to them, so that they can own it and they can self-regulate and self-discipline themselves. So yeah, and also in terms of the shift, what you're talking about, I would call it, the shift never happened in the colony in a very, like a rupture, that the clock tower constructed and then the people started using the other mode of time. I would use the word negotiation. In the colonies, the power were always negotiated, and somehow it took a form of a hybrid form, which I would say is visible in the clock tower and its architecture and the clock and how people desired it, in the sense. So this hybridity and the call for it, and the nature of the modern power, which is capable enough to deal with this multiplicity. This is what Foucault says, that wherever power confronts multiplicity, the panopticon becomes the best means to control it. So yeah, this is my interest, in the sense that how the power shifted and how negotiations happened, and then how hybrid structure formulated themselves, and then how in this holistic sense the entire regime of time transformed.
A quick question. Oorjag, you wanted to add something?
No, go ahead.
And then I have a question also.
It's a quick question. Is the clock tower still there? Does it survive to this day?
Yes, the last image what you see is the image which I have clicked.
Okay.
My house is nearby to that clock tower. I've been around that clock tower.
And then an imagination exercise. If the clock tower got destroyed nowadays for some reason, what do you think you and the people in the city would feel?
Means I would expand this question. Means nowadays it doesn't matter whether the clock tower is functioning or not. I
Yes.
would even say even it would have destroyed during the time when the clock tower was the
Mm,
main source of time indication. It wouldn't have affected them much. This is what I'm trying to say, is that the power functioned in the manner where it diffused itself rather than centralizing itself onto one tower.
mm,
So it stopped working as a king's palace, which you can bomb and start controlling the region. It started functioning as if the time and its discipline got diffused into people in themselves. So
mhm.
even if the clock tower gets destroyed, people became the panopticons in themselves for each other.
But what about the cultural signification of the tower and the clock itself? Would people feel like they were losing something that is part of their history, their identity locally? Of
This is what
course.
I said. This is what in one of the paragraph I said, that the history of Mewar is known for its valiantly fighting against the invasion for 500 years, from
Mm-hmm.
the Muslim invasion and the much harsher conditions when the Maratha conquest happened
Mm-hmm.
um, from the south. Um, but this is surprisingly is interesting that they fought against it and never allowed the tradition to get affected. But it took no time for Britishers to get into, or somehow I would not say Britishers, but it took no time for the clock to get into their
Yes.
architectural elements.
Mm-hmm.
This is the ambivalent nature what I'm talking about, this power structure, that it smuggled itself through the culture uh, uh, surfaces, cultural elements.
Okay, now I have a question. It's a quick one. Well, first, I want to say that here in Mexico we have a town that's Pachuca that also had English people living, and they also put a tower with a clock. I don't know if it changed people in Pachuca and now they are like super punctual. I don't think so. I'm, I'm not
No.
sure. But it's interesting because other colonial cities, o sea, it's not a clock, no? We have churches or
Yes, but there are
Yeah.
bells.
kiosks,
And
but
and,
not,
and, and Marcela, also the bell towers are also the
well,
same
yeah.
idea in Mexico.
Yeah, but the bell tower is like connected with religion, because you are like ringing the bell because you have to go to mass, no? Or,
Yes, but that was imported or imposed by the Spaniards. So.
yeah, o sea, and it was a control of time also, but a
Mm-hmm.
different one. And
Mm-hmm.
then I want to go to this idea of desire that you say, no, like a desire of being controlled or desire of being in time, no, into the realm of time, no. And I also think about that in addition of our addiction to cell phones, no, that are controlling our time, our attention, our everything, no? And I don't know if it is a desire or it's more like something that it's like I don't know, like an appropriation of our bodies, no, or an embodiment of our persons in the attention of what is happening, no? Because now we have like these apparatus that are a window to the world, but it's more like a window to an algorithm. So maybe I was like thinking if you are like thinking ahead of what you are saying about this desire of control.
Yeah. Means I think my aim was mostly to reach I wouldn't say the origin, but somehow the center of it, like where it began, especially in India, by taking this one specific case study of clock tower. Then it definitely grew and became more complex in the sense that um, we no longer needed a constant reminder of time through a tower or the bell. Uh, we have somehow internalized that temporal discipline. So that in itself is the progression of that specific regime, which somehow took more control or grew in us and internalized its discipline. Um, but in terms of what you're talking about, the church bell, which is the same concept with which the factory clocks and the factory whistles and the factory bells came through. As the church used to organize the temporal order of the community for the religious purposes, the same kind of mechanism was then implanted for the factories. So the factory becomes the church for the community. In the sense now, earlier when they were going or they were being indicated or signaled to go for the prayers, now they have been indicated to go for work. And then it got more proliferated in our lives, and then it's all over now. So yeah, so this internalization is the main aim of this way of regulation of control, where people becomes the subject themselves, and not just for themselves but for to keep the others on the track also. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered. Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I think that sort of ambivalence, as you called it, is very interesting. That from a personal point of view, at least personally, I maybe do want to use a timekeeping device, or even if it's external, in order to organize my own life. But at the same time, that has been used, as you just said, since the Industrial Revolution, maybe even before, in order to organize the time of other people for production purposes, so for work. So the whole idea of 9 to 5, working today from a specific time to a specific time of the day, has been completely, has overtaken completely our own idea of our own personal time. But it does do both functions. I mean, I still do want to know the time of day, even if I'm going to go to the movies or go meet someone or something like that, right? So it has this dual purpose that can be used for control and for imposing ways of organizing others people's lives, but also our own. So that's maybe the complex part about it, right?
Yeah. Means this is the way. Means discipline is not just the product of industrial revolution. Like people were disciplining themselves for in the monastic orders, let's say.
Sure.
But what changed during the industrial revolution is that discipline became something, what I said, as an autotelic in itself, an end in itself. That you're not disciplining yourself for, let's say, for spiritual purposes. You're not disciplining yourself for your master. You're not disciplining yourself for any other purposes, but just for the sake of making something what Foucault calls the body is more economically productive but politically obedient.
Mm-hmm.
So politically docile bodies in the sense. So in this sense, it's productive. Uh, the modern power is not just coercive and restrictive; it is also producing subjects, and it's producing to the level where it's enhancing the capacity of bodies, their economic capacities, to the level that they do not they become an obedient subjects of the keeping of time, like when they become the subject who recognize time, who can read time, who can follow time, who can come on time, be on time. uh, yeah, means in my other few chapters I'm also looking at how the shift happened in the factories, and how I'm looking at through the factory reports, the commission reports, the for the legislative acts which were passed by the British government, And in those reports, you can see how workers were constantly negotiating with this new regime of time which started coming up, who were weavers or agriculturalists in their lives, and now suddenly have to become workers, and uh, how they got disconnected with the work, what they were doing, and all just happens with the shift in the idea of time. And even after that, I realized that I found this one incident where in the archive where I found workers embraced clocks in the factory. They started negotiating for the fixed temporal or the working hours. So nobody had to impose clock in India to the workers. It is the workers who started desiring it, to make or to negotiate their labor more efficiently, or to make an abstract time where the manipulation of their labor becomes hard. It become impersonal. So I think I sort of lost the track what you asked.
No, it's okay. Amado, do you want to add something, or Urja now?
Yeah, I was just interested in the word that you used called taskscape, and that is something that the exhibition really focused on. And for example, with the work of Sohail Bhatia, who measures time by drawing a line from morning to sunset, and the body becomes the measure of time. Or for artist Noor Mata, who actually uh, calculates the time that takes for her to walk through a walker as compared to other bodies, and how different bodies also experience time differently, which was central to the conception of the exhibition. The other artist that I can think about is Natalia Mejia Morillo, who was working with a bell tower in Mexico City, which was constructed in 1990s. And it was pretty famous and has like 10 different types of clocks and ways of measuring time. And one of them is a sundial, which she uses and creates like a small version of it in the exhibition. And also a book on clocks, which was used for children's entertainment, which mentions the earliest forms of clocks as to be the water clock. I can also think about the work of uh, Tona, artista anonimo, who measures the metrobus timings, or the papers that measure the metrobus timings, and Sonam Chaturvedi, who writes a fictional essay about time waves and how they are impacting different materials and spaces. So, yeah, just to sum up, like this exhibition into how whatever you talked about today or whatever we talked about today was interrelated to the exhibition, and pass over to Amado before closing if you have any remarks.
I've been thinking about, because I think I feel like I'm also a time freak. I liked what you brought to us about the idea of internalized time as a way of desire. And I think I want to close with this series, going back to science fiction. Have you ever saw Loki? Loki is very powerful metaphor about time, because I mean, I'm gonna bring some spoilers, but the idea that, like, one, the universe is organized as an office, like a bureaucratic way of constructing time, is always that always struck me, like our way, like the way we represent the universe now, like from so many cultures, our culture represents the universe as an office. That's something that's so fucked up, like talking about 9 to 5, Dolly Parton. And second, at the end of the season 2, he became like the god of the, like controls time, and then he controls all the multiverse that are linked in the multiverse of Marvel. So he, in the way like he controls time, he was able to control time and space. And then to close this crazy Disney metaphor about power, he became like the god of this multiverse, controlling through time, but also he's the god of mischief. So it's a funny way to put it out in pop culture. So like the god of mischief became the god of time, the one who also at the same time controls all the possible variations of ourselves in multiple universe. So for me, I always try to find out some there like knowledge through pop culture and what Disney is telling us. Like yeah, like time is a way of control, but also is a way of mischief, and also is a way to put order into time and space. And I will leave it there. So it's not as exciting as I say, but I mean, I really enjoyed the end of the series because that resumes a lot of what they are trying to do and control the narrative. So for me, like in the series, it's like they literally say, if you control time, you control the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's a very powerful way of ending this. Because right now we are living in a crazy time, a really crazy timeline. So maybe Loki can like be present and change something.
Help us out a little bit. Yeah.
But well, really, thank you for being in this Martes de Marte. And I don't know if you want to say something else to close, or Yang, Juan Claudio.
No, I think thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you for being here too.
Thank you, and until next time, nos vemos la próxima en nuestro noticiero del acontecer marciano espacial y en el próximo Martes de Marte. Gracias.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.